I came across the writing community bedtime story, is it called? Yesterday when I was writing interview questions for authors for Indie April. And me and my sister Virginia, who's also an author, set ourselves the challenge of doing this today. Now, I'm not used to talking to a camera, not really, so this is going to be really interesting. It's also a long time, a good few months, since I've read my book out loud. It's called Taking Wing. It's backwards on the camera, but never mind. It's called Taking Wing, and it is a middle grade fantasy adventure. It is, well, I'll read you the blurb before I actually read the first chapter. A 12-year-old Freya enjoys karate and is the only one in her class who's trusted with a part-time job. But everything changes when she meets a boy with yellow eyes. She learns about the Guardians and how an age-old fight has prevented them from fulfilling their purpose. Freya finds new friends in the Crow tribe, but not everything in the castle is blissful. A destructive shadow lies within her, and all she needs to do to release it is close her eyes. But as the Guardians' war rages on, Freya realises that although the shadow's power can be useful, it can't create peace. To do that, Freya and her friends must solve the mysterious crime that began the war. Can they bring the Guardians together before they destroy each other? It's on the darker side of middle grade fiction, so it's really for people like 10, 11 and 12 years old. Older middle grade, basically, more 11 and 12. So yeah, I will read the first chapter. Now the first chapter is called chapter 1, but it's actually more like a prologue. It's what starts the whole war off. And the first chapter is set in the year 617 AD. It's called An Eye for an Eye. Six women carried the body, laden with jewels from around her empire. Behind them, other women carried trays of gold and silver, emeralds and rubies. Somewhere in the crowd of people behind, a man was singing a tune without words, and a woman was wailing. But these were the only sounds. The footsteps made no noise, and there were no birds to sing. Everything else was silent. Farmers, soldiers, and nobles followed the funeral, looking ahead at the woman's body. One man watched from a distance, his black eyes taking in everything around him, but they were focused on the woman. He had the same white hair flecked with brown as the lady on the bier, coming to the same sharp point in the middle of his forehead. As the funeral passed, he joined them, standing directly behind her, never taking his eyes off the body. There were no tears, no sadness, but anger seeped out of him, causing the other people to keep a safe distance. His normally smooth face was twisted in anger and grief. The procession soon came to a boat, looking out of place as the river was 1 mile away. Without a word, the women stepped into the boat and placed the body on a platform strewn with fur and bird feathers. Silently, they stood back and left the boat. It was then that the man stepped up beside the body and bent down so that his face was almost touching hers. When he was close enough, he looked down to see the cut that had caused her death and whispered in her ear. "You go before me," his whisper was almost like a hiss. "You will not rest until I avenge you, and I will not rest until that day." On saying this, he spun around and did not look at her again. Knowing that he would not be able to stop his tears if he stayed, he did not watch the rest of the funeral, but strode from the burial site, his face growing more twisted with rage. A loud guttural croak caught the man's attention, and he looked up to see an unusually large raven sitting watching him. The raven's black eyes were staring straight into his, and it opened its rough beak again, making the same noise. It made the man shudder. "No wonder you are called the bringer of death," he snapped, and moved towards the bird, snatching at it wildly. His grief had made him misjudge the distance, and all the raven had to do was simply hop a few steps and watch as the grieving man fell onto the scrub. When he got to his feet, the raven had gone and was replaced by a large man. He wore body armour as black as his hair and neat beard, but more unusually, he wore a long cloak made from small twigs woven together. The white-haired man could not bring himself to look at him. Every time he met the raven black eyes, anger and hatred overtook any other feeling he had. "Raedwald," the raven man croaked. "Raedwald, please look at me." "How can you speak to me?" Raedwald, the white-haired man, hissed. He brought his eyes up to meet his, and the same feeling of bitter hatred swept through him. "How can you speak to me when my wife is being buried? My wife that you murdered." The other man looked at him without speaking. His black eyes glistened and his mouth parted slightly as though he was about to talk, but he shook his head sadly. "I demand that justice is done," Raedwald shouted and drew his sword, staggering under the weight of his grief. "We did not kill your wife, Raedwald," the other man pleaded with him. "Enemies as we are, I mourn Edward's death. Let me help you find her murderer." "You would blame an innocent to cover your guilt, Ethelfrith." He shook his head. "You may pretend to be a friend, but I know it was your tribe who killed her, and we shall be at war until I know that the murderer is dead. We shall be at war until I have avenged my wife." "No," Ethelfrith moved towards him. "I want to find Edward's killer. I promise you that it was not the crows who killed her. Please believe me. I don't know how to persuade you that I'm telling the truth." Ethelfrith's face was serious as he begged to be believed. His voice never faltered, and Raedwald looked at him for a moment, considering what may or may not have been the truth. Surely this raven could not pretend so well. But Raedwald was so certain that it had been a member of the Crow tribe who had killed his wife. Perhaps Ethelfrith was unaware of who it was, but it must have been a crow, so he was clearly losing his grip on the tribe he once commanded. Raedwald never doubted that he was guilty. Whether or not he was directly responsible for his wife's death, Raedwald was unsure, but he should have stopped it from happening. Because of that, he was guilty. An idea glinted in his pale face, and a small smile, so slight Ethelfrith could not see it, touched his thin lips. "You would put our past behind us," Raedwald's voice faltered, and he gave a false smile. "For as long as it takes to find the guilty one. Until then, we are brothers again." The white-haired man looked at him, feeling a fever of anger sweep through his blood, and nodded slowly. Despite the bitterness and hatred, he walked over to him and laid a hand on Ethelfrith's back in a sign of false friendship. "Brothers again," Raedwald repeated his companion's words, but unseen by the other man, his face contorted into a twisted, ugly expression of hatred. Determined to begin his revenge, Raedwald hissed a laugh and was too quick for Ethelfrith to defend himself. He pulled the raven's dagger from his waist and let his hatred control his actions. And that is the end of chapter 1, or prologue. Now after that it goes to present day, and I won't mention too much of what happens, but from the blurb, Freya is a normal 12-year-old girl pretty much, very sensible for her age I suppose, and she gets caught up in this fight that has been going on since the year 617 AD, and she becomes determined to bring about peace. I won't say if she achieves it, and I won't say what happens further than that, so I will put I have the links on my website, and I have a link to my website on my Twitter page, so I'll put it down in the description. Thank you for listening. I am now going to go and see if I can persuade my sister Virginia to read the first chapter of Caledon, which she published in January this year, so it was very new. This was published in July last year. This is an old book now. We're going to celebrate its first birthday on the 11th of July. But Ginny's book Caledon is very new. It was published in 2020. It's not for children. It's an adult book. It is historical fantasy and it's very, very good actually. It's very good. She has just been doing a blog tour for it, a review tour, and everyone seems to really enjoy it, which is fantastic, and I'm really proud of her. So she's no excuse not to take part in this bedtime story reading. I also nominate my other sister, Judith, who has recently become a finalist in the Wishing Shelf Book Awards, I think it's called. And I'm incredibly proud of her for that. Her book is a young adult novella. It's a ghost story. So I'm going to get her to read her first part of that. And I also nominate my mum, who is also an author. Now she is publishing her third book not next week, a week on Monday. And it is nature writing, so it's very different really from the others. It is non-fiction, narrative non-fiction, and it is fantastic. You know, she really has this ability to paint a picture with the words. She's very good at poetry as well. I think that has an impact, I think, and she uses that sort of poetical language in her writing, which I think for nature writing you really want. I really want anyway. So that is very, very exciting. We are going to have a Twitter book launch for it because of obviously all the restrictions that have come about recently. We were planning an event, but that couldn't happen, understandable reasons. So we're going to do a Twitter book launch, and any help for that would be hugely appreciated. It's a fantastic book. Her first book, Child of the Isle, which was her memoir, was very popular. This one is called Child of the Earth. So it's kind of like a companion, but this one's more sort of nature writing. It's something special, if I'm honest. So those are the three that I nominate: Virginia Crow, Judith Crow, Susan Crow. So until next time, bye bye.